Welcome back in our Issues crew. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Michael Coppage. He is a famous local artist known for his boundary-pushing works. This is going to be part 1 of 3. We had such a long and interesting conversation that it's worth 3 full episodes. Here, we discuss how he got his start, his style, and why he makes art, as well as who he makes it for. And of course, how it relates to mental health. Without further ado, here's the IOI crew. Welcome back to In Our Issues. We are the In Our Issues crew, plus 1 extra special guest today.
Yay!
Yeah.
I got my own set of issues, though. Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect. That's like,
that.
that's one of the biggest criteria of coming on this podcast, man. You know what I'm saying? Like,
So
got to be one of the crew.
right? With the circles where they overlap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So wherever our issues overlap, that's where the magic happens.
Is the issues in the room with us right now?
No.
Issues?
I know mine are.
Always just invisible. Just puppet mastering my brain behind, like, standing on my shoulders. Anyway, so this is Michael.
Yes.
Michael Coppage,
Yes.
welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
We're very happy to have Michael Coppage here. Michael is an artist who is, don't let me put words in your mouth, Michael, but shit's getting good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just
it is getting good for me. Yeah.
reading about your aim as an artist and how you champion the idea of breaching people's comfort zones in a way that might be thought-provoking and insightful is very courageous, if you ask me. And I think that's pretty dope.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I don't really look at it as a courageous act. You know, I look at it as like there's a deficiency, you know, of work, especially in this part of the country. You know. This Midwestern, Mid-Southern kind of space. There's a deficiency, and you know, there's a void that I feel like my work fills in a way. And you know, it's interesting because, you know, a lot of the work that I see is you know, it's usually like commercial works that are meant to be aesthetically pleasing and to sell, and you know, you know, galleries are in the business of selling artworks. Artists are sometimes in the business of making money, and I've had to kind of reimagine what a practice looks like, because you know, I'm not making a lot of money, right? But I am being awarded a lot of money to produce work, which is in my mind maybe a little bit better.
Not a little bit. If in my mind, not a little bit, a lot better.
Yeah. Well, from a tax standpoint, but also, you know, what it says is that, you know, whoever this body that's gonna give me this money to produce this work, we believe in your work. We believe in what you're doing. Yeah. And we have confidence that, you know, we have so much confidence that we want to make an investment so that you can make more of it. And so, you know, I produce this work and then I retain ownership. Yeah. And if it comes to a point where I get to sell or want to sell or whatever, then I also get to sell it. So it's not the only personal investment it's really taken me has been my time, my labor, emotional labor and physical labor. And you know, it could be argued that that's extremely valuable, but it hasn't cost me any like monetary resources for the most part. And that's what's beautiful is that I've strung together a couple of years now of projects where, you know, I'm not having to self-fund them. And you know, and be that starving artist kind of stereotype. Right.
So how did you get your start
with art?
I'd love to know your journey.
Oh man. Well, I think it started in my childhood. I mean, I feel like everyone says that.
Michael, I read a story about you, and it said people came to your class when you were in school, elementary school, for like career day. And asked everybody what they wanted to be, and you were the only one that said, "I want to be an artist when I grow up."
Everyone else said astronaut, firefighter.
And I mean, and that was, that was the day I announced it, right? I said it out loud and kind of started manifesting it. But I think it started, before that, with my mom. My mom is what I call, now I call her a DIYer, but before HGTV and all that stuff, I would have called her a crafts person. She makes everything. I mean, when I say everything, I mean like everything. So let's like from culinary to all of our, like not all of our, but a lot of our nice clothing growing up, my mom made.
Wow.
Like all our sweaters and scarves and gloves and bags and all this stuff. And then she started making like embellishing stuff, like all these like jean jackets and with rhinestones and all this. And then that graduated to like sculptural forms. She made these sculptures out of foam. And now, I mean, she's like redoing basement floors, like her basement floor, not other people's basement floor. She's building rooms out, and she just built a pergola or a pagoda or whatever the hell that thing is.
Pagoda,
called, in her backyard and on top of a deck that she also built. You know what I mean? So like, so my mom is,
she's like Superwoman.
She's like if she had a TV show, it would be, I mean, I would watch it. It would be hilarious. I could see her just like talking shit and smoking cigarettes and like hammering something. And like,
that's a solid character right there.
Yeah. And so in my entire life, I've seen my mom do this, and I didn't know that it was really affecting me, in this way. Yeah. But I spent a lot of time on punishment as a kid. And, I was, when I was a kid, punishment was real. It wasn't like, we're going to take away your cell phone because cell phones didn't exist. It was like, we're going to take away your TV. We're going to take away your video games. We're going to take away, back then, every kid wanted to go outside. So they took away outside. And you can only come out of your room grounded for dinner and then use the bathroom. It was like jail. And I spent years on punishment because my grades were terrible. And so I found myself, occupying my time making art. And, it started out with like little drawings with markers and stuff like that. And it graduated to pointillism. And then, I started using like Prismacolor stuff. And, and I never doubted myself, but I was always fully aware of my own limitations. Yeah. So, I would say it started back in childhood.
What does that mean, Michael? You were aware of your own limitations?
Well, I know I'm not the best at anything. I'm not the best anything. And so what my goal is to produce, the best image or object that I'm able to produce with the resources that I have. And so in that way, I'm able to kind of stay realistic. I'm able to stay humble. And then from there, I think it just opens that, working in a space like that opens up possibilities in other spaces, and that's been kind of reinforced throughout, the last few years anyway, just like, just kind of staying in that space, just understanding that, I have deficiencies. I am not able to do it all. I'm not the best at anything. But what I am good at, I know how to frame it to maximize its impact.
We were talking about that a little
Storytelling.
bit. Yeah. Right. Before we sat down to do this officially. And you were talking about putting art in spaces where people don't necessarily expect to see it. Yeah. Like on your way from one place to another. Yeah. And I have experience with that with your art. And what it does to me is it's out of place. My brain is on autopilot almost all the time. And your art wrecks it a little bit because it's not what I expect to see. And so it goes in, and then either, unconsciously or consciously at some point I start thinking about it. Yeah. So for me, it's a good way for you to reach me. That works for me.
Yeah.
Meeting me where I am, giving me my own time to think about things.
Yeah. I think that's how I would imagine that it would work for everyone who comes into contact with it in a public space, right?
Yeah.
Because it's an offering without any context, right? Like you said, it's kind of out of place, Really, it's not out of place. This is a perfect placement. This is site specific.
Correct.
And because that thing that the work is prompting you, the behavior the work is prompting you to engage in is why the site was selected, And so I'm just trying to find creative ways to engage the most amount of people in the most amount of places. So it looks like, placing the work in non-traditional spaces, but it also looks like, a variety of materials, or mediums, right? So, everybody doesn't like podcasts, but maybe some people like video, right?
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't like video, so maybe they like live performance. Oh, well, you don't like live performance. Maybe you like painting. Maybe you like bronze. Maybe you like photography. Whatever it is, I would like my practice, the breadth of what I have to offer to utilize all of, or as many of these mediums as possible to reach people, right? Because there might be, I have one project that has 4 entry points, right? So one project it's a lens-based project, but it's placed as a mural in an alley or on a building or something like that to engage people. Now there's a museum quality version of that hanging in a museum somewhere. So that's one format in 2 spaces. But if you look closely at both of those works in both of those spaces, there's a QR code. And if you scan that QR code, it takes you to a podcast where you can hear the voice of the person or the people who are standing in front of you, right? And then you have this kind of this 3 entry points identified, but then there's a 4-channel video, or there's a 6-minute film, or there's also another element, because there might be people who come to this movie theater to see this premiere and see my short and not know anything about my practice, but still be exposed to my work. And then they're out in the wild on that walk, and they see that motif and they're like, hey, like, I know this. They start making connections because the work is showing up in really unconventional spaces. Everybody doesn't go to the museum, and, especially people who aren't, reflected positively in the museum. Right. Yep. So it's important that the work be where, the most diverse kind of cross section of people may be, or at least pass through.
You're like your mom of art.
I think you might be right. I mean, after playing back all of that stuff that I just said about my mom, with the exception of smoking cigarettes and hammering stuff.
Yeah.
You're right.
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
I'm just, but all my work addresses some social issue, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And specifically social issues that get skewed or misconstrued as controversial or political issues, right? Like we seem to we want to politicize things that, that we can't justify socially. And, we turn it into a political debate, then we can kick the can down and we can preserve the structure as is until my ride's over and I get what I can get from it, and then it's someone else's problem.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you have an eclectic versatility in your style, but your voice is always your own.
Yes, absolutely. And it's always my authentic voice. It's not derivative. It's not influenced or inspired by what other people are doing or saying. My work is, kind of a visual catalog and chronicle of my lived experiences and my observations,
That's really important. I want to get right back to it, but I want to jump back to something you said earlier. Where are some of these spaces that are not traditional art spaces?
We got to do some of this with our podcast.
Well, I mean, you mean, so nationally, I would say, well, let's start with Cincinnati, I guess. In Cincinnati right now, on the windows of the Ensemble Theater, I have an installation right on 12th and Vine Street that just has integrated so well. And it's about kind of Black queer folks and their stories and that lived experience.
Super important.
At the 21C in the alley there between the 21C and Nicholson's, there are 13 images of Black women there for the Black Box series. That alley gets so much use, and the folks who sit in that restaurant see the images. I mean, just passively and intentionally, there's so many people who interface with it. In the 21C gift shop, the shirts from the project are in the gift shop. Even if you haven't seen the work and you don't know what the work is supposed to be, the shirt engages, right? I've installed them in FSG Park in New York and in Queens in New York.
Got you.
I installed it in Blink. People from Blink didn't know that this was part of this larger body of work. They just thought it was this big Care Bear who was shooting love and whatever at the crowd,
So that was you?
Yeah, that was me.
Gotcha. I remember that.
On the Aeronaut. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I've installed these images in Puerto Rico, on the stairwell leading to the only bar with a rooftop in this one city. Because I know that people all over the world are going to come to this one rooftop in this place. So this was like ideal. And so those are spaces that like you would typically imagine a mural might be. But what happens is all of those spaces become portals to the podcast, And so my podcast has reached, over 2 million people in 23 countries.
Wow.
Incredible.
Like when I look at my insights and all of those analytics, like it, there are people from all over the world. I think because I'm installing them, people from all over the world come to New York. People from all over the world are going to Puerto Rico. I've installed these in random Wisconsin. It for me, I just try to put it in a place where everyday people are coming in. When I want art people in the art world to see my work, curators and historians and my contemporaries, I put my work in art spaces. Right. And I send out the invitations and people come or they don't come. But for this work, I don't have to send out an invitation. These are spaces that are populated automatically.
It's just so cool.
By hamburgers and hot dogs.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah, by the hamburger and hot dog people. Yeah. And they serve, these spaces serve my purpose almost better than some of these gallery and museum spaces.
That's amazing. We talked about lived experience a little bit before, and I wanted to know, like, in your journey specifically, how did you know that this is what you wanted to do with your art? Like, when was the this is it, this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah. Well, I didn't, honestly. I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I didn't know what the path was. In art school, my art school experience was materials and techniques, in undergrad, which is also why I'm kind of like my mom, because I was encouraged to do everything, to learn how to do everything, how to just get a basic understanding of it, not necessarily be proficient at it. And so then I tried 2 years as a teacher, and I was okay, but I realized that I didn't want to be a teacher. So I was going to go to the Peace Corps. I got accepted to the Peace Corps. My destination changed. It kept getting pushed back. So I decided to say forget it, and I went to graduate school. Wow. When I went to graduate school, it was a little of the same kind of materials and techniques, except I had to write a thesis, which became more the philosophical approach to the work. And that's when I started really developing like the conceptual side of my practice. But after I graduated, again, they don't really prepare you for the real world. They don't, No. There was no introduction to galleries or curators or not. I mean, it's a shame when I think about it. And so what I did was for 10 years, I didn't make art. I made it passively because to get in a show, you need to have work that's a year or two old or 3 years at the most. But like, I just traveled around the world, and in my travels, I found that I got so much perspective about what my experience actually is, who I actually am. Yeah. And when I came back, there were things that became less and less acceptable to me. And so I didn't really find my voice until after that 10-year period was over in like 2018. So 2018, I started working on the series that I've now come to be known for, and the American Plus series there, that body of work.
Michael, a few years ago, we were at 21C, and you were doing a tour for some people. You had two paintings hanging on the room floors.
Yep, those were the first works from this body.
American Plus?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
What's the plus represent?
The plus represents the amount of energy it takes to navigate all of the societal barriers at each stage of development. So in my case, growing up in a food desert, right? Well, even before that, let's talk about Black maternal health outcomes, right? Right? So Black maternal health, then you have nutrition, and how it can impact the quality of your education outside of the investment in the schools based on the value of the homes in your neighborhood, right? Yeah. But at from education to the legal system to the housing system to a million other systems, in order to land on equal footing with my counterparts from other racial and ethnic groups, I have to avoid being ensnared in a system that's designed to kind of take me off the board and use my body to generate income in a jail, in a hospital, and this kind of thing. And so the plus represents the energy that it takes to navigate this system, right?
Absolutely.
I think that African American isn't an adequate designation for Black people in this country. I don't think Black is an adequate designation either, but African American, if we look at it numerically, it implies that there's something, it implies that my American is, less than American, right? It's diminished in some way. And with, understanding what my lived experience is and understanding what it took to get here from the support of my family and my community. Yeah. And being able to see it and avoid it, even though I had to go through it instead of around it, I think that the plus designation is, an affirmation for myself, because when I travel, I've been around the world. Like I said, when I travel, being an American isn't a great thing. People see you and they think that it's a great thing because they think you come with money and you're going to spend money, but they don't really respect us. They don't really respect our policies, and we really don't respect these places that we go to. We act like asses, and so when I go, I don't fit that stereotype. They see a different America because I live in a different America. I was raised in a different America, and so. I consider myself American plus. I think Black is just extremely loaded with negativity. I mean, and that has nothing to do with race. Actually, it has everything to do with enculturation. You know, from the moment we learn our colors, we know roses are red, violets are blue, grass is green, the sun is yellow. And what we learn about black is that it's bad, it's scary, it's whatever. So we exacerbate the negativity in nouns by adding black to it, you know? So the black heart, black magic, black ice, black head, black sheep, black. There's 50.
Those 13
but they're like 40.
That are in the alley between Nicholson's and 21C or
and
representation of that.
And so identifying as a black person, everything that we learn in this country about black, you know, when that's projected onto me, it's assumed that there's something inherently negative about me. That's not the right designation for me. You know, I mean, you know, in this country, black people are always redefining what words mean, you know, like black, like the N-bomb, like all of the, you know, we have to take these words and turn them into something positive since we can't strike them from our cultural and collective language. So what would it mean if we just said, you know, fuck it, and we just created our own designation, because these are all designations that someone else has given us that we've just kind of remixed and made cool or whatever, but
because of the nature of the country.
You know what I mean? I'd rather create my own designation like American Plus, and I'd be totally comfortable walking around saying that. I mean, you know, African American also applies that, like my Italian American friend or my Croatian American friend or my Mexican American friend, that I have a home country that I can go back to, when that's not true. You know, our black people didn't immigrate here. You know, black people came here as hostages. So all of these designations are, you know, I think they're suits that don't fit.
Would you have been able to create the work that you're doing now, Michael, if you hadn't traveled the world after 2 years of teaching? Did that open your eyes a little bit as to
your mic is sideways?
What? Oh man, I hate when my mic goes sideways.
Oh, you turned it the wrong way.
As long as the conversation doesn't go sideways, I think we're good.
That usually is about 45 minutes in. You'll recognize it.
Yeah.
I'm glad I caught it.
But yes, the answer to your question is yes. So I taught for 2 years, then I went to graduate school, and then I traveled for 10 years, right? And during those travels, you know, all the perspective that I got, all of the, you know, how people treat me overseas is very different than I'm treated here. You know, we talk about microaggressions here where people grab their purses and they grab their kids, they pretend they're on the cell phone, they apologize to you for nothing at all, right? Just breathing next to you, right? Because they think you're gonna like spaz out, because the only exposure they have to people who look like you is through the media they consume.
Yeah, because they live in a bubble. And I've encountered so many people like that, dude.
But you go overseas and people gravitate towards you. They automatically assume you're famous or something because they have no idea why you're here, right? And they assume that you're someone, so they give you their kids. They want you to take pictures with their kids.
Interesting.
They take 1,000 pictures with you, you know, like, and you can't tell them you're not someone famous because they don't care. They're just so excited to see you because this is not a common thing. It's becoming more common, you know, with you know, black people kind of making more money and getting better education and being able to do these things. But but it's a thing. But this American Plus series, the monkey paintings and all of this stuff, that came from a conversation I had with a Chinese Malaysian guy when I was abroad. So if I wouldn't have traveled, I would have never started this series, because I would have never had this conversation that led to these ideas about this body of work.
Really quickly, we can link to whatever you want us to.
Sure.
So we can show those.
We can link to the podcast too.
That I saw at 21C were baboons, right?
Well, yes, but there were other species of white monkeys as well.
And
yes.
You did not know when you painted it that a group of baboons was called a congress?
I did not.
Wow.
I did not. And ironically, at that same time, my mom works for the government, right?
Yeah.
At that same time, the government shut down, and my mom was furloughed, and there were like hundreds of thousands of employees countrywide that were furloughed. They weren't getting paid.
Yeah.
But then there were also people who are receiving SNAP benefits and food stamps, that sort of thing, who also weren't getting their food stamps and all that stuff because the government had shut down. And, you know, this particular painting that he's talking about is called Charlottesville. And it was about, you know, everything that happened in Charlottesville, but it doubled for what was happening simultaneously in Congress.
Yeah.
Because the monkeys that I chose to paint in this particular painting were baboons, you know, and it's the only time I've used baboons, you know. Usually I use macaques or capuchins or some other kind of white monkey, because I'm stereotyping like white people essentially through the use of these different monkeys. Like all these monkeys look different, but they're all being stereotyped as the same kind of thing, and I'm kind of centering whiteness so that the viewer can be a little more critical about the white role in the Black experience, right? And I think that we often overlook that when we're looking at, you know, paintings that just have a bunch of Black people and doing Black things, right? Like it's easy to like disconnect and have no ownership, but I create works that always center, you know, white people. And it doesn't matter if they're paintings. I do it in my photographic work. I do it in my sculptural work. Because the situation we find ourselves in is not a situation that we arrived at by ourselves. You know? We had a whole lot of help getting here. And so, you know, we don't just get to say, oh, well, that time's over. It wasn't me. I didn't have anything to do with it. You know, that's not an acceptable response. You know, because there's a lasting impact, and we can see it, you know, in the quality of our housing, the quality of our education, and the quality of our healthcare.
Yeah, and even outside of a societal level, you have epigenetics at play. Like there is intergenerational trauma that impacts generations.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because, you know, we're so used to living like and moving, you know, with all of the baggage that like we see it kind of manifest in other spaces, like unhealthily in other spaces. So a lot of the crime, a lot of the mental health issues in the community, a lot of like there's no clean boxes, right? And I think that, you know, what I do is I put people in shirts with boxes on them, you know, to like highlight how this isn't a clean box. You know, I was having a conversation with my friend who's part of the Rainbow Box Project, and her shirt says lesbian. And she called me, and she didn't call me, she texted me, and she's like, man, I'm having some kind of dysmorphic response to this because this doesn't fit me. And I'm like, well, you have a girlfriend, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I'm just like, it's like, I'm saying that, but really, I know that, you know, I know that. I said, well, what would you prefer? How would you prefer to describe it? She's like, well, I'm queer and I'm like non-binary, gender affirming, and and I understood that, you know, that's language that wasn't around when I was a kid, you know, and that's language that wasn't around when my mom was a kid. So, you know what, let's do a project that helps unpack this so that, you know, people in society just don't have a better understanding of how much space there is in the intersecting components of an identity. You know, it's not just a lesbian or a trans person, you know, there's so many other components, and a lot of the t-shirt kind of photographic works that I'm involved with all kind of speak to the intersectionality of identity, whether you're, regardless of your sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Right? And so, man, I'm exploring a lot of different topics, and I think that, they're all stories of people who are marginalized. I'm using materials that have historically been reserved for the elite, and I'm using them to tell stories about the marginalized and to be in conversation
That's awesome.
with, these historical works of art in our museums that glorify rape and murder and the beheading of people. And then, you put these bronzes of these basically abused and tortured Black men that I'm making and who've been murdered by police. You put these sculptures in the same space, and that creates a dissonance between the imagined mythological reproduction of a story with the hyper realistic depiction of a story that we've seen on TV many, many, many times. And before it was on TV, I saw many, many, many times. And it's an education tool in a way, because it says to museums that like we need to create more context around what this work is saying about people. When I walk into a space, I see myself, enslaved or in servitude. That doesn't speak to me, that doesn't speak to me. I'm definitely not the target audience. And if it does speak to me and I happen to internalize this, how do I see myself? What's my esteem look like when I walk out of that space versus the other people who come in and see themselves as aristocrats and as, as royal family members and Jesus even, right? Like, what do those people feel like when they walk out of that space, compared to, what I might feel like seeing this, this depiction. So it's a lot of work. It's in a lot of spaces. It's doing a lot of things, but at the heart of it, it's telling stories about the marginalized, essentially.
That's awesome. I actually had an observation that I wanted to share based off what you were saying. Just like the nature of race is that like you see the person and then you can tell what race they are. You know what I mean? Yeah. And with like a mental illness or something like that, it's, it's not something that's on your skin. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not visible.
And so like the idea of taking a shirt, writing lesbian on it or whatever their binary, like their intersectional binary or their intersectional identity is, and making that visible on a person is a really fascinating exercise to me. It's like if I walked around wearing a shirt that said ADHD on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like CPTSD gang.
Yeah.
Like I just think that your work creates a fascinating conversation around just how much the world banks on like just judging someone based on their racial identity and how we should question that and challenge that. And I think that's a great conversation to be having at a time like this, where there's a very heated conversation about that stuff that is very necessary. And it's pretty epic.
I like it too, because it's flipping that perspective on its head. Like you have that experience going into a museum. And I think it's important that, as white people, they have that similar experience and they can feel those visceral emotions on what that's like for them, because a lot of times I feel like people don't even think about that.
Right.
Yeah. It's your experience all the time, but
Thank
people
you for
don't even
bringing
think
that
about
up, because that's where I was going to go. I had no idea that, you as a Black person may not have the same experience at the art museum as I do, but I get it after you said it, because my brain went, what's there? And I cataloged and I went, yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
Exactly. I love the plus thing.
But I never thought about that before.
Yeah. And I would say that, here in Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Art Museum has, in the last year or two, done a lot of work to improve and add variety and diversity to the work that they're purchasing for their permanent collection, and also like the work that they're displaying, because I think there may have been a time where they didn't see it either, you know?
Yeah.
I think you're right.
And it took, it took someone dying, unfortunately, to be the catalyst for so much of the change and the progress that, that we're on the path to make.
Yeah.
But we still have, we have a long way to go.
I want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. George Floyd is the person that you're referring to.
Yes.
Okay. Bet. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
So for someone like me, you saw that work at the 21C in 2018, so I was already on this path. I've already been talking about this work. Before this series, I did a series of 33 portraits of African American males with schizophrenia, right?
All right.
Because I was working in a mental health space with some of the most intensive folks, and I would always end up with the black ones, right? Yeah. And it wasn't because they were requesting people. I've seen people request black doctors, but I ain't never heard nobody say I want a black case manager, So, and I was a supervisor at the time, so like they definitely asking for a black case manager supervisor. So, but I think that because they were scary and they were symptomatic, and they, there was just this lack of cultural competence, they always wound up with me or with my team. And a lot of these guys were a couple of years younger or older than me. So it could have been me, if one little detail was different. So I thought that I would do these portraits inspired by these guys, not, because HIPAA still applies. So I couldn't do a portrait of them, but I did portraits inspired by them. Mm-hmm. And that was like my first real commitment to a body of work. I was still traveling and all of that stuff. And the show showed at two places, so I traveled just to two locations. And I got a glimpse of what it could be like, but I knew that mental illness wasn't the path for me because I've never personally struggled with mental illness, right? Mm. And because I didn't personally struggle with it, I felt like it was authentic because my experience was valid in this space, and I saw what was happening and how it was happening, and how we called the police more, how we over medicated them more. I saw all of these things, and it made me feel something that was true to me, that I observed it. So it was mine to tell. Yeah. But that was all I could do. There was no layers that for me to dig and kind of unearth, So I traveled more until I kind of came to this American Plus thing. Now, this is something that I can talk about for my entire life because it's been my entire life. It's something I've experienced my entire life. And so
I feel a similar way about my mental health journey and my trauma experience with my writing. Writing has always been such like a visceral way to express my emotions.
Same.
And like, it's always been something that I'm telling my own personal experience. Yeah, I can try to write from other people's perspectives, but it's not as authentic. And I really do appreciate that, is that you had something that you could have fully leaned into and you had that opportunity to, but it didn't feel authentic to you. So you went towards something more authentic. And I think that's so important because people can get wrapped in that bubble of like wanting that affirmation. Yeah. And they do something that's not necessarily aligned with who they are. And I think that's really important.
Well, for the sake of the populace. And then
from your own lived experience, you can't be wrong.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. And I don't, and lucky for me, like I'm not chasing affirmation, right? Like I have the most positive voice in my life. My internal voice is extremely positive. I don't have self-doubt. I don't talk bad about myself.
Must be nice.
What's that?
I kind of knew that was coming. But I have learned that, if with all of the mistreatment out there in the world, the only person that's going to treat me how I truly want to be treated is myself. And so I give myself that grace. I give myself that. That's it's not about being unrealistic. We have to be realistic. I started this conversation by saying, I have deficiencies. I'm not the best at, But that could be a very negative thing. I could be like, oh, I suck. This is terrible. Like nobody's going to like this. And I could spiral. But instead, like I keep it real with myself, but like I also, give it my best. And as cheesy as that sounds, I was watching something, some Korean TV or something, and there was these kids who were taking a test, and the kid didn't do well. And the parent asked him, well, did you do your best? And this was more than one kid. And some of the kids said yes, and some of the kids said no. For the kids who said yes, the parent was like, well, then don't worry about it, because if you know that you walked away from this test and you gave it everything that you could give it, then there's no reason for you to be upset about anything.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to be the best at everything. You're not going to be the brightest in every space. And you have to be willing to accept that. And when I saw that, I mean, I don't look at a whole lot of Korean TV. I look at a lot of Korean action movies, but like it spoke to me. The one time I did watch it, I heard something that I use in my life on the daily basis, and so my internal voice is like pretty positive.
But I think that's so important too, because oftentimes people who experience the most, trauma and impact from life and have that internal voice are the ones that need to carve out those safe spaces for other people because they know what that's like. And I think that's really important that you're operating from a place of personal experience, but you're also representing people who may not have the power to stick up for themselves in the same way. And I think that's so awesome.
Absolutely. Like just us mental healthers, us people, healthers. Whatever that means.
I kind of like that though. That's cool.
Us mental healthers.
I like that better than social worker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like as an artist, I feel like a social worker. Actually, my practice is very much like aligned with social work, right? Yeah. But I do like mental healthers, because that sounds like somebody that's like been in the game for a long time.
Mental health, bro. Like,
and we have 28 years right here.
Let's talk about it. Like, so like us mental healthers, so to speak, we have our own sort of little plus experience when it comes to just, this country and just existing, because we all have these brains that will take us up here and down here when we're supposed to be in the middle and taking care of things. And, and it's, I'm obviously, I don't know what it's like to live in America as a black man, obviously, because look at this. I have like no melanin in my skin. I'm very Irish. But like basically when it comes to mental health, it's something I've lived with all my life. It's an experience that's very different from anybody around me who's neurotypical. I really relate to this in that way.
And there you have it. Our first window into the mind of Michael Coppage. Groundbreaking artist, activist, and overall chill dude. It's truly fascinating how racial identities, mental health identities, and sexual orientations can shape the way we view the world. And even more interesting to see what happens when they intersect. Stay tuned for part 2 of 3 of this epic conversation in 2 weeks, only on the In Our Issues podcast. Don't forget you're awesome. Peace out.